If you walk near Pennsylvania Avenue this morning, you won't see power. You won't see progress. You won't even see activity. What you all see is silence. The kind of silence that only comes after something goes very wrong. Where there was once movement, noise, and ambition, there is now a stalled construction site. Cranes frozen in place, machinery shut down. A wide, exposed pit sitting uncomfortably close to the most symbolic building in the country. According to court records filed early Monday, all construction linked to the President A.'s controversial White House expansion project has been ordered to stop immediately. No delays, no negotiations, just stop. As of this morning, a federal judge issued an emergency injunction halting work on the proposed Grand Ballroom project, a $400 million renovation plan that was supposed to redefine presidential hosting and global diplomacy. Instead, it may now redefine political overreach. Sources present in the courtroom described the ruling as unusually sharp, with the judge questioning not just the funding plan, but the credibility of how the project was presented to regulators, preservation authorities, and the public. For months, the administration promoted the ballroom as a privately funded gift to the nation. Officials insisted taxpayers would never be involved. Supporters framed it as a bold modernization. Critics called it excessive. Preservation groups called it destructive. But what happened this week changed everything. According to sealed filings unsealed this morning, the private funding behind the project has not materialized. Pledges that were reportedly made by high-net-worth donors were non-binding, conditional, and, critically, not transferred. When federal agencies requested proof of funds before allowing the next construction phase, the money wasn't there. That's when the court stepped in. The judge's order doesn't just pause construction. It freezes the entire project pending a full review, citing serious concerns regarding financial representation, statutory compliance, and irreversible harm to protected federal property. Legal analysts say language like that is rare and dangerous for any administration. To understand how this reached such a dramatic halt, you have to rewind to late last year. Fresh off inauguration events and international appearances, the president announced plans for the most ambitious physical change to the White House complex in decades. The existing facilities, he argued, were outdated, insufficient, and embarrassing for hosting global leaders. His solution was the Grand Ballroom, a massive extension designed to rival historic European state halls. Plans showed soaring ceilings, expansive reception space, and luxury finishes. The cost estimate quickly ballooned to $400 million. The administration's response was simple. Private donors would cover everything. No public funds, no burden on taxpayers, just patriotic contributions. But the cost wasn't only financial. The proposed site required dismantling portions of the East Wing infrastructure, relocating offices, and excavating historically sensitive grounds. Preservation organizations immediately raised alarms, arguing that the White House is not just a residence or office, but a protected national symbol. Lawsuits followed. Initially, the administration prevailed by invoking national security. Government lawyers argued that elements of the project included secure facilities and modernization necessary for presidential safety. A federal judge allowed limited demolition to proceed, but with conditions. No permanent construction, no concrete, no irreversible steps until full approvals and verified funding were secured. That's where the gamble began. Demolition moved fast. Images of heavy equipment operating near the White House complex dominated headlines. Supporters praised decisiveness. Critics warned the administration was moving before securing legal and financial ground. And according to this week's court findings, those warnings may have been correct. Behind the scenes, global markets were shifting. A sudden shock in international bond markets triggered volatility across financial sectors. Major investors faced margin calls. Liquidity tightened. According to filings, several donors who had expressed intent to fund the project began delaying transfers. One reportedly withdrew entirely, citing fiduciary obligations amid market instability. By Friday, federal agencies requested confirmation that the Ballroom Fund was fully capitalized. They didn't receive it. By Monday morning, construction was halted. The judge's ruling makes clear that this was not a technicality. In his words, proceeding without secured funding risked leaving an unfinished federal site of historic importance in a compromised state. He further questioned whether regulators were given an accurate picture of the project's financial readiness. Even more damaging was what emerged regarding the national security justification. A previously sealed assessment reportedly showed internal disagreement among security officials, with concerns that the construction itself introduced vulnerabilities rather than reducing them. While the administration cited security upgrades, the report allegedly warned about exposure during excavation and long-term design risks. Legal experts say this undercuts the foundation of the administration's original argument. If the project is not essential to security, then it becomes subject to strict preservation laws that severely limit what can be altered on protected federal sites. And optics matter. Instead of unveiling progress, the administration now faces cameras pointed at a stalled project. Visiting dignitaries will pass inactive equipment. Press briefings will take place with construction fencing in the background. A project meant to symbolize strength is frozen mid-execution. Politically, this lands at a fragile moment. Recent polling already shows voter frustration over economic pressures. Focus groups cited in internal surveys reportedly reacted negatively to the scale of the Ballroom project, questioning priorities during global uncertainty. The image of luxury expansion contrasted with everyday financial stress is not an easy one to manage. For now, the court has given the administration 30 days. Secure verified funding, re-justify the project legally, or submit a remediation plan to restore the site. What happens next could define not just the fate of this construction, but the narrative of leadership itself. In Part 2, we'll break down what the court actually said, why donors quietly disappeared, and how this project turned from a symbol of ambition into a legal and political trap. The most striking thing about the court order isn't just that construction was stopped, it's how the judge explained why. Legal analysts who reviewed the 40-page injunction say it reads less like a routine procedural ruling and more like a warning. According to transcripts released shortly after the hearing, the court focused heavily on the gap between what regulators were told and what was actually happening behind the scenes. At the center of the case is money, or more accurately, the absence of it. The administration repeatedly assured oversight bodies that the Ballroom project was fully backed by private funding. But when asked to provide proof, officials acknowledged that the funds were based on non-binding pledges rather than transferred capital. In normal construction, that distinction might be manageable. On protected federal land, it's explosive. The judge noted that demolition had already taken place. Historic structures were removed, landscaping altered, offices displaced. All of this was done on the assumption that replacement construction would immediately follow. But without verified funds, the site now sits incomplete. The ruling described this as creating an unacceptable risk of permanent damage to public property. Sources familiar with the proceedings say the judge was particularly frustrated by the timing. According to court documents, internal disclosures were submitted late Friday night, after markets closed, revealing that the Ballroom fund was not capitalized. By Monday morning, construction crews were already on site preparing for the next phase. The court interpreted this as a failure to act in good faith. Then came the donor issue. For months, the administration spoke confidently about a coalition of wealthy supporters eager to fund the project. But when financial markets turned volatile following international bond disruptions, those same donors reportedly went silent. Legal filings describe missed calls, delayed responses, and formal withdrawals. One donor cited market uncertainty and fiduciary responsibility in a written notice. This matters because several donors had allegedly signed statements indicating their commitments were secure. The judge raised the possibility that if those statements were used to influence regulatory decisions, they could trigger further scrutiny. He ordered the administration to submit full documentation of donor commitments for review. Behind the scenes, this created immediate tension. Political allies worried about exposure. Legal advisors reportedly urged caution. And donors already facing losses elsewhere had little incentive to step forward publicly. The national security argument, the justification that allowed demolition to begin, also unraveled during the hearing. A classified assessment from security agencies was partially unsealed. While details remain redacted, the judge summarized its conclusions in plain language. Rather than enhancing security, the construction introduced new risks. Open excavation near sensitive areas, long-term vulnerabilities tied to glass and open-span design, increased exposure during construction. In short, the court concluded that security concerns were overstated and selectively presented. That conclusion is devastating legally, because if the project isn't necessary for security, it falls squarely under preservation law. And preservation law does not allow irreversible changes for convenience, prestige, or aesthetics. The judge's words were direct. The White House, he wrote, is not owned by its occupant. It is held in trust. Stewardship, not personal vision, governs what can and cannot be changed. That principle now frames every decision going forward. Meanwhile, the optics worsened. Reports emerged that staff meetings had been repeatedly disrupted by construction noise in prior months. Now the silence itself is the disruption. Visiting delegations are reportedly being routed around the site. Temporary barriers dominate sightlines. Press cameras capture idle cranes and exposed ground, a physical reminder of unfinished ambition. Politically, this intersects with broader narratives. Voters already concerned about economic instability are now confronted with images of a stalled luxury project. Focus group reactions cited in political analysis describe the contrast as tone deaf and out of touch. Whether fair or not, perception drives impact. Capitol Hill is paying attention. Lawmakers from both parties have begun asking who authorized demolition before funding was secured. Oversight committees are reportedly requesting briefings from the General Services Administration. Some are questioning whether procedures were bypassed under pressure. For the administration, the clock is ticking. 30 days is not a long time to raise $400 million in cash, especially in uncertain markets. Alternative funding options face legal barriers. Congressional approval would be required for public funds. Foreign funding would raise constitutional concerns. Redirecting existing budgets appears blocked by the court order itself, which leaves a deeply uncomfortable possibility. Restoration. The court explicitly ordered agencies to prepare a plan to remediate the site if funding is not secured. That means filling in the excavation. Re-landscaping. Reversing what can be reversed. The result would be a White House complex altered not by expansion, but by erasure. Symbolically, that's brutal. A project meant to leave a legacy risks leaving a scar, or worse, nothing at all. Politics is about images as much as outcomes, and the image emerging from Pennsylvania Avenue is not one of momentum. It's a wide, open space where certainty used to be. For a leader whose brand has always centered on building, expansion, and visible success, an unfinished project carries particular weight. Supporters argue this is a temporary setback, that funding will be secured, that courts will be satisfied, that construction will resume. But even among allies, there is quiet concern about what this episode represents. Because this isn't just about a building, it's about process, credibility, and control. Internally, reports suggest strain between agencies. Preservation officials felt sidelined. Security professionals felt overruled. Budget authorities now face pressure to explain how assurances were given without verified funds. Each department is protecting itself. That's rarely a good sign. Then there's the donor class. Political donors don't like uncertainty. They don't like subpoenas. And they definitely don't like projects that turn into legal case studies. Analysts note that once a project becomes radioactive, it's almost impossible to revive enthusiasm. No one wants their name associated with a controversy that could outlast the administration itself. There's also a longer-term calculation. Future administrations could cancel or reverse the project entirely. A donor contributing tens of millions could see their investment erased by a successor with a pen and a press release. That risk makes hesitation rational. The court also raised questions that haven't yet been answered. Who signed off on proceeding without funds in escrow? Who verified donor commitments? Were regulators given a complete picture? These questions may not lead to criminal findings, but they invite investigation. And investigation prolongs uncertainty. Public reaction is evolving. Early coverage focused on the drama of the halt. Now, commentary is shifting toward symbolism. Analysts compare the stalled project to broader themes: economic stress, institutional limits, and the consequences of speed over caution. Late-night hosts are already joking about it. Editorials frame it as a lesson in governance. Political opponents use it as shorthand. Supporters downplay it. But the image remains. A construction site without construction. From a historical perspective, the irony is sharp. The East Wing was built during a time of global crisis, under secrecy, with purpose. It lasted decades. Its removal was justified as progress. Now that progress is paused, possibly undone, the personal dimension also matters. Reports suggest frustration inside the residence, logistical challenges, staff displacement, changes to daily routines. These details rarely make policy headlines, but they shape internal morale. Internationally, the pause is noticed. Foreign media coverage frames it as a sign of domestic friction. Diplomatic analysts note that visiting leaders will inevitably ask questions. Even unspoken, the visuals speak. And that may be the lasting consequence. The project was meant to project strength, modernity, and confidence. Instead, it projects uncertainty. Whether that perception fades or hardens depends on what happens next. If funding appears, approvals are granted, and construction resumes quickly, this may become a footnote. A momentary stumble. But if delays stretch into months, if restoration plans move forward, if hearings escalate, then the image of the halted site becomes fixed. History often remembers symbols more than specifics. A hole in the ground can become a metaphor. For ambition, interrupted. For promises, outpacing preparation. For power constrained by law. As of now, the administration faces a choice: solve the problem decisively within the court's timeline, or accept a reversal that will be studied for years. Either outcome will be visible, because unlike policy memos or legislative text, this story is concrete, or in this case, the absence of it. We will continue monitoring court filings, agency responses, and funding disclosures as they emerge. When the next move is made, whether that resumed construction or restoration, we'll break down what it means, why it happened, and how it reshapes the political landscape. Until then, the cranes remain still, the site remains silent, and the story remains unfinished.